regardless of the funding source, and at the same time, parks being closed in other areas. And then my final question is, at least on this area, with respect to the funds requested for creating new revenue-generating projects, how does the parks closures work into that? Are you going to be expending any of these projects in the parks that are currently proposed to be closed?
The sort of revenue enhancement exercise I was talking about, we're really focusing on the ones that are open in order to enable us to steward the resources that we're still going to be operating. So these are focused, so that $4.3 million and the continuous appropriation, all of that, that's really focused on the parks that are not on the closure list.
So we'll be taking money from the general fund to be able to develop...
Actually, the State Park and Recreation Fund. It's not space of the general fund. The general fund, in our view, is kind of the thing that's way in decline. So the request to you for continuous appropriation is actually additional space of State Park and Rec Fund, which is our earned income. It's not...
could be used to operate parks, correct?
It is used to operate parks. But it's not general fund. I just wanted to clarify. It's a special fund.
Didn't it come from the general fund?
No, okay. No, we earn it.
All right.
All our State Park Rec Fund is concessions, fees, entrance fees, special events, all that.
Right. So I understand then. We'll be taking money that could be used to operate parks and shifting that to the development of new revenue-producing projects.
The idea is that if we can generate new revenue, that we could then spend that new revenue as we earned it.
But not necessarily for reopening parks.
At this stage, our goal is to keep the incentives into the districts that are doing it. So it's a way to try to generate. And if we're successful beyond our wildest dreams, then that's certainly something that we can always revisit. I'm not going to preclude that. But I think that the committee's interest in the LAO has been very clear on saying we want to know that if you're doing this for incentives, that you're actually rewarding and that you have that link.
No, I understand. But again, we're taking money that was generated by the state parks all over the state from a fund that could be used to operate parks and using it for the development of new revenue-generating projects that will be the money from which, the revenues from which will go back into those districts where those revenue-producing parks exist. So we're taking the money away that could be used to keep parks open and shifting it to those parks that are going to remain open to generate new revenue to keep them open.
Senator, if I can try and clarify a little bit, and forgive me if I'm missing your point, I apologize, but the $4.3 million in continuous appropriation in the State Park and Rec Fund that we're requesting in the budget is contingent, as the chair pointed out, on our earning that revenue as new revenue.
No, I understand that. I'm talking about the 11
and our
million.
proposal for the use of those funds is, A, to cover the costs of raising them, meaning we need to, for the example, if we're putting cabins in someplace, those cabins need to be maintained. We need to be able to provide money to that district so that they can afford to maintain those cabins. The net revenue produced would then be split and divvied up, and some of it would go back to the district that earned it as an incentive for them to pursue revenue-generating projects, and some of it would go into our overall budget allocation process to benefit other parks that we continue to operate, which perhaps don't have the opportunity for that kind of revenue generation. The most pointed example is typically our state historic parks have very little in the way of opportunity to raise revenue. Our extremely remote and rural parks don't have much opportunity for that. Other parks that are perhaps more centrally located, get more visitation, that are not historic parks tend to have greater opportunities. Our intent within that $4.3 million is to take a portion of that money and subsidize the operation of those state historic parks, those rural parks, in order that they can achieve the mission of the department, which is to protect the resources and provide for recreation opportunities.
And the same is true of the $11 million from State Parks and Recreation Fund?
The $11 million actually comes out of our base authority, our pre-existing authority. My expectation at this point is that would continue to be used as it currently is used. That is, it gets allocated out to the districts and the parks for operations and maintenance.
That's a little different than how I read this under the governor's
And I
budget
apologize for that, and again, would stress we are trying to respond to a change in our environment, the change that I think is captured in this chart, the change where we have become dependent on the revenues we earn. The specifics of how we do that, we are more than happy to work with you and your staffs and the LAO and finance and anybody else to hammer out how best to do that. Our only point, the major overarching point in this is our world has changed. We can no longer count on the general fund to support our operations. We need to find another way to meet our mission, which is the operation of the parks, the protection of the resources, and so on.
And I'm going to step in at this point because I know I've got colleagues who have time constraints. So Senator Evans, if I can ask if we can try and pull this together. Here's what I'm going to do. I am going to ask that we continue to explore these issues through the committee staff and through staff in my office. And while I know you would respond to any individual legislator's request, I want to work collaboratively with Senator Evans to make sure that her questions get answered through our committee staff that provide some structure and formal vehicle for that. So appreciate your willingness to provide the rationale for the 70 closures by the April 9th date. I think that will be helpful in breeding a little more trust in the process among folks who are struggling.
I just want to make sure everybody understands what we think we're going to be producing, make sure I'm producing what you are expecting. It would be the name of the park, and there would be sort of a brief narrative of low visitation, high cost, low revenue, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And no more than that. So.
Yeah, I'm not asking for a 30-page book report on each park. I'm asking for a.
And it's not going to be like there's a big scoring. You're not going to see A, B, C's, or D's or numbers or anything else. It was really much more about a number of variables that were looked at in conjunction.
Why did he pick the Blue Blazer? He picked the Blue Blazer because it was reasonably priced. It was good value for money. It's a classic look, and he can wear it to every committee hearing.
It was on sale.
Thank you. And it was on sale. All right, that's what I need to know.
Mr. Chair, there was actual criteria set forth by the legislature.
Yes, and the criteria set forth by the legislature are the bullet points that I think you just described that you'll incorporate in your analysis. Okay. Now, I want to just close with this observation. First of all, thank you very much to the witnesses. Is there any one last word you want to get in, a sentence fragment that has been prompted by the conversation the last half hour?
Yes, for 2 years.
I would just, Tracy Verta-Torres with the State Parks Foundation, I would just say that as the committee continues its interest in not just the revenue generation, but the overall support of state parks at the risk of moving in a direction the committee is not intended, I would support the comments of the Sierra Club and others that we would absolutely welcome a discussion about a dedicated funding source for state parks.
Great. Thank you. And same. And?
I appreciate you giving me the last word, but at this point, I just appreciate the discussion, and we look forward with working with the legislature and the administration.
And let me go back to the folks from Parks. I very much understand, in part because I've been, you've been stuck on that side, I've been stuck on this side for the last 4 years. That being said, here's what I think is driving a lot of the conversation. I asked the question, how much money are we trying to save with 70 parks closures? You said basically it's $11 million. It's 30 cents a Californian. For 30 cents a Californian, we're going to close 70 state parks. What the hell are we thinking? I mean, that's what's going on. And I understand that's not your judgment. I get that. I understand you're dealing with a difficult set of choices that have been brought to bear on you and your department. But as I said, I think when you step back from all of this and get yourself out of the weeds, it's like, really? We're going to close 70 state parks to save 30 cents a Californian on an annual basis. I don't think anyone thinks that really makes an awful lot of sense. So the conversation is to be continued. We appreciate the fact that there's a commitment to get those reports that seem to be missing somewhere in the report trail ether. So let's try and get those squared away. Appreciate the willingness to bring us what I'll call a précis, a summary of what the judgment was about each of the 70 parks by the 9th. Appreciate the willingness to follow up on some of these other questions, and we'll work collaboratively with the committee and with individual members who have questions. And I guess the last question here is, so if the legislature were able to restore funding through some funding proposal that's floating around, would the department still need to close parks?
If you just brought us back 11 million?
Yeah. Suppose Mr. Metropolis went down the front row and said, hey, here it is. It's in the seat cushions right there in the front row. And we had $11 million. Would you still need to close 70 parks? Department of Finance?
Can I defer to Finance? You really put me on a spot.
Finance? You're the designated bad cop. What do you have to say on this?
Mr. Chair and members, if the legislature made a decision to add funding back to parks, we would have to go back through that deliberative process as the director has talked about. Park closures were just a portion of the reduction. Of course, it was service reductions and partial closures. So that the inverse of the process, that parks got to come to the list that we're going to get to on the 9th, and that rationale, the inverse would have to happen, and depending on what the level of funding was as well.
LAO?
If it was the full cut was restored, yeah.
We don't feel like we're the experts on what this extra 11 million would be.
Senator Lowenthal?
Yeah, I'd keep the parks open if you find 11 million.
Okay.
But I don't have the final. I just have one question about this. It seems like what we're here, we're not just seeing this with parks. We're seeing this profound paradigm shift is what we're talking about. That rather than out of the general fund, we have to find new revenue sources. And it may not be taxes, it may not be fees we're talking about. So, and I have no answer. I think you're struggling with it. Every place is struggling with it. We're struggling with that. We're seeing that with fees for higher education, which is quite different than our master plan, like our parks, which was affordable and accessible higher education. Long gone. I'm just struck with one of the recommendations. I don't know. And after having listened to an earlier discussion from when we talked about, I think that was, I don't remember if that was boating and recreation or fish and game. I don't remember where it was, but the discussion was, had to do with one of the recommendations. Well, the recommendation I'm thinking of had to do from the LAO, and it's also in the handout that you gave us about increasing concessionaires. How do we increase concessionaires? And I was struck with when we talked about with State Lands Commission, when we talked about, well, there was an audit, and they were doing their job and doing what they thought, and then the audit said, hey, you should be looking at business development for ports. That's what you should be doing. There is money to be made. It took an outside agency in order to tell us there potentially is money there to be found. Not that I want to go in this direction. I think you're going to need outside help in that way also at some point to identify whether it's going to be an audit to look at, and I'm not sure that's the place to go. I'm not saying there's some problem. I'm just saying how we really identify what potentially, as the paradigm shifts, what is able to be done, where are those places, and where are we going to go? I know you mentioned that there are a number of them that you're working on, 10. I think it'd be really, and you said a letter is attached. I don't think that you had written, I hadn't seen the letter probably. I think we're going, maybe not right away, we're going to have to understand that more. Because I don't think this is going to stop at this point where we are. I mean, the shift in the paradigm has already begun.
I don't disagree at all, and one of the points on the list I've given you talks about cost and revenue management. We've actually hired a firm that worked with the Department of Parks of Georgia, and we're just hiring them to look at a couple of districts to really drill down on a very park-specific basis. What does it cost to run a park? What are the core functions you absolutely have to do? What are revenue opportunities? And eventually the goal is to have, I hate calling it a business plan because then
It
everybody
is a
thinks
business,
we're
and you
becoming.
shouldn't be hate anymore because that's the
We get beat up for
paradigm
using
shift.
that term. I could use strategic plan
I
or
know,
sustainability
I know.
plan or whatever term you want to use,
How
but
can
the
we
whole
be talking
idea.
about business development, economic development?
I think
when
you
we're
need
talking
a
about
then each
sustainable strategic
sustainable
business plan myself.
There you go, sustainable
That's right.
strategic business plan. That's what we'll call it,
exactly
the
right,
SSB.
because we are moving, and
Yeah.
I would like you to get ahead of it and not to have to deal, because we're dealing with now some of the horrors of not being able to fund it, and we're saying, why is it on it, what's on? I'm saying that train has left the station already.
Right. As part of the transformation of the institution is once those business plans are done, then each district superintendent is going to be held accountable to having that plan for each park, and they're going to have revenue targets, and every year they got to turn that dial. And you don't hold a historic park with the same expectation as a beach, but each one has to turn the dial.
That's right, and this
so that's definitely
legislature
where
is
we're
going
heading.
to need to understand those strategic, what did you call them, sustainable?
That's a
Sustainable strategic business plan.
I'm going
That's
to
what
go
we'll call
to
them.
Senator Fuller, and then we're going to try and wrap this piece up.
I totally agree that we really need, I mean, it's good for us to have some baseline that people were treated fairly, because you have a lot of constituents that come forward and they need to understand that there is reasoning. So we do that. But at the next point for me, you have some concessionaires that are working well, I assume, or they wouldn't still be working well. You have some nonprofits that you have great hopes for, I'm sure, or are already working well. So maybe at some point, to ease the anxiety of the future, those places that are rating, are doing well can be rated as doing well and advertised as demonstration projects for people to see that it does work. Maybe in your park where you are, you've never seen a concessionaire park work. You don't want one because you don't know what it is. But if you know that there's a list of these are great places that have nonprofits and concessionaires that are working, and they can go visit there. Or some such thing that begins to grow the idea in the public's mind about what a different paradigm looks like under these terms.
All right, thank you. I think we've covered everything on page 18. The one reminder to circle back on is we had the discussion at the outset long ago about the continuous appropriation issue. LAO, I think, references appropriately the need for trailer bill language if we're going to give that serious consideration. We'll ask the committee staff to work with the LAO, the Department of Finance, and your department on some trailer bill language, which I don't think guarantees, but certainly is a precondition for moving forward. It would. I started out skeptical. You moved me to open-minded. The trailer bill may help get me a little farther along. Trailer bill language may help get me a little farther along, and I suspect that may be true for other members as well. All right, thank you very much. I think that covers everything there. Before we go on to the next item, I want to go back, members, to the two items where we did do a roll call vote but held the roll open. I'm going to ask the committee staff to announce the issues, to announce the vote, to announce the page number in our budget document so that absent members can find the items, and we're going to then pause a moment or two before we expect them to cast a vote. So let me ask committee staff, what's the first item on which we have an open roll?
On page 10, State Lands Commission, the revenue enhancing proposals. The recommendation was to approve proposals for royalty recovery, revenue assurance, lease compliance, revenue enhancement, and then supplemental reporting language.
In concept.
In concept. Sorry.
Go ahead.
The vote is 2-0.
Please call the absent members.
Senator Fuller.
Aye.
Vote is?
3-0.
Those measures pass, and the roll is now closed. Next item, where the roll is still open.
Page 16. This is the Department of Parks and Recreation. The items proposed for vote only. Items 1 through 5. The vote is 2-0.
Call the absent members.
Senator Fuller.
Aye.
That is now 3-0. Measure passes. The roll is closed. Members, we have one more item, and that's the Empire Mines State Park. I believe that's the only remaining item. Let me ask for a brief presentation from Department.
Sure. As you know, this has been an ongoing project. We were sued several years ago, and we have a consent decree that in federal court that we're having to meet, and so we're working with the Department of Toxic Substance Control and the Water Board, and the regulator agencies dictate to us then what we need to do. So far, we've remediated about 12 different sites and have helped clean the magenta drain and have a well-functioning passive cleanup system that actually saved the state a lot of money, well, saved the total cost a lot of money. There's going to be several more years to go is our expectation. We think there's going to be at least another 12 remediation sites we have to do. In terms of the end game, it's the intent of the department. We're working with the Attorney General to eventually recover all the costs of this cleanup. We're doing it in advance because we have to, because the courts are ordering us, but it is our intent to, through whatever legal means are required, and I'm using the phrase my lawyers told me to use, whatever legal means required, we are going to try to seek to get all the money back that we are spending to clean this up.
Given the mounting costs on an annual basis, that would be a desirable goal,
Yes.
no doubt. We have a staff recommendation to approve. Are there questions from members of the committee? If not, a motion to approve would be in order at this time unless there are any members of the public who want to speak to this item. Seeing none, motion by Fuller to approve. Call the roll.
Senator Simidian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller? Aye. Senator Lowenthal?
Passes 3-0. I think that completes the work. One item before we let everybody step away. Ms. Coleman, I want to say thanks in advance. I'm meeting with Parks tomorrow on the Pescadero Creek flooding issue. I just want to take this opportunity in public setting to say this issue has been unresolved for the 10 years that I have been aware of it, and certainly before I became aware of it. I'm looking forward to your can-do resolve tomorrow for a timely resolution on the issue, and we'll be following up with you as we move through the course of the year. This is a local issue for me, members, and it's just been out there for far too long. We need to figure out a solution and implement that solution. Any last words from LAO? Ms. Coleman, anything from you or your department? Okay. All right. Folks, it's been a real day at the State Beach. Thank you. We're adjourned.